They walked among us unnoticed, their presence as ubiquitous as churches, their influence as indelible as religious art. Religious orders were at the heart of medieval society. But how well do you really know them? More than just solemn copyists of sacred texts, these organizations played diverse roles. To unravel this hidden history, let's deconstruct 5 prevalent myths about religious orders in medieval Europe, revealing surprising truths and lesser-known tales that challenge conventional narratives. The myth of monastic simplicity. While today we might picture monks in threadbare robes, subsisting on meager meals and lost in prayer, the reality was far more complex. Yes, there were orders that embraced austerity, but many others enjoyed surprising comforts. The Cluniac order, a prominent Cistercian reform movement, started with humble ideals. But after receiving massive land grants, their lifestyle changed dramatically. By the 12th century, Cluniac monks resided in lavish dormitories, enjoyed rich meals, and wore opulent robes. Wine flowed freely, music echoed through the halls, and hunting was a favorite pastime. The church historian Leofrid of Cluny described a typical meal: roast peacock adorned with spices, accompanied by venison, pork, and a variety of fish, far from a simple existence. This trajectory wasn't unique. Many orders amassed wealth through land ownership and donations, leading to opulence and, in some cases, accusations of simony and clerical immorality. The myth of the obedient nun life as a nun was not always as serene as commonly portrayed. Behind the cloistered walls of convents, a different story often unfolded. While some women willingly chose religious life, many others were coerced, particularly in convents where aristocratic families sought to avoid paying costly dowries. Once inside, life was rigidly structured, demanding obedience, isolation, and often a renunciation of personal autonomy. The pressure to conform could be intense, leading to acts of defiance or despair. Some nuns romanticized the hardships of their existence, writing poetry about their longing for freedom or composing plaintive laments about their confined lives. Others resisted through passive means, like neglecting their duties or feigning illness. The walls of convents also sometimes bore witness to darker realities. Secret liaisons between nuns and priests were not unheard of, a testament to the human element that existed even within the strict confines of religious life. The myth of the benign monk, the image of the monk as a pacifist, peace-loving soul, is another widely held belief. Yet the history of monastic orders reveals a more nuanced reality. Some orders were indeed dedicated to spiritual pursuits like scholarship or contemplation, but others had more active roles. Perhaps the most famous example is the Knights Templar, a holy order founded in 1118 to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. But as threats evolved, so did the Templars, becoming a formidable fighting force and a key part of the Crusader armies. Clad in white robes and bearing red crosses, they were renowned for their martial prowess and unwavering commitment. However, this martial aspect came with a darker side. The Templars accumulated vast wealth and power, leading to accusations of misconduct and even heresy. King Philip IV of France engineered their downfall, charging them with heinous crimes, likely as a means of seizing their assets. Whatever the truth, their dramatic dissolution in 1312 showed the complexity of religious orders, which could be both spiritually devoted and dangerously ambitious. The myth of uniformity within monastic orders. Now imagine walking into a medieval monastery and are immediately struck by a sense of sameness. Rows upon rows of identical cells, each housing a monk absorbed in prayer or study. This picture of uniformity, however, doesn't align with the full reality of monastic life. Despite belonging to the same order, following the same vows, and adhering to shared rules, each monastery was unique. Size, location, wealth, and even the type of work undertaken varied significantly. A mountainous region might house a small, secluded monastery of hermits finding solace in solitude, while a riverbank could be home to a large community of working monks running a mill or a farm. Even within a single order, diversity flourished. For instance, the Cistercians, known for their dedication to hard work and simplicity, were divided into suborders. Cistercian monks specialized in different areas such as manual labor, study, or hospitality. This internal differentiation, coupled with the external factors of geography and resources, ensured that no two monasteries were truly alike. The myth of worldly disengagement from the outside looking in. Religious orders might seem like islands of spiritual devotion, untouched and uninterested in the affairs of the world. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. Religious orders were deeply embedded in medieval society, not only through their sheer numbers, but also due to their entanglement in worldly concerns. Some orders, like the Benedictines, were founded with the express purpose of aiding the Church in times of crisis, such as the Arian controversy in the 4th century. Others, like the Franciscans, played significant roles in preaching and missionary work. And then there were the orders that became entangled in the political landscape, either through land ownership or direct involvement. For example, the Cluniac order's vast holdings made them powerful players in regional politics. Meanwhile, orders like the Teutonic Order, originally a hospital for pilgrims, transformed into a ruthless military force, expanding their territory and influence through conquest and subjugation of pagan populations. In essence, to view religious orders as solely spiritual entities is to ignore their multifaceted roles in medieval society, which ranged from the pastoral to the political and occasionally the predatory. And now we want to hear from you. How has your perception of religious orders shifted after exploring these myths? Are there any other misconceptions you'd like us to tackle? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to stay tuned for more journeys into the past. Medieval monasteries were often seen as safe havens, places where holiness was protected from the corruption of the outside world. But behind those thick stone walls, far from the eyes of kings and peasants, darker things sometimes festered. Monastic life, for all its chants and rituals, could be a prison. And within that prison, wolves sometimes wore the robes of shepherds. In this part, we explore what life was really like inside the cloister, especially for the vulnerable. Because not everyone inside these holy places chose to be there, and not every man of God behaved like a saint. Now, if you've watched our other videos on medieval monasteries, you know how central they were to medieval life. They provided education, food, comfort for travelers, a sense of order and spirituality in a chaotic world. And yet, for all their good works, monasteries weren't perfect. In fact, they were often rife with abuse, exploitation, and even horrifying crimes. It's a dark side of medieval life we don't talk about enough. So, today, let's peel back the layers of history and look at the darker truths of medieval monasteries. Let us start with a disturbing truth. Many people in medieval religious orders didn't enter willingly. As we mentioned earlier, it was common for noble families to send one or more children into monasteries not out of piety, but to avoid splitting the family fortune. Got too many sons? Make one a monk? Daughters too expensive to marry off? Ship them to a convent. Children as young as 5 or 6 were placed in monastic schools, often with no say in the matter. Some grew up to embrace the life. Others endured it in quiet misery. A few tried to escape, only to be dragged back, beaten, or branded as oathbreakers. This was especially true for women. Once a young woman took the veil, leaving was nearly impossible. Even if she had been forced into the convent, church law rarely allowed her to return to secular life. Some nuns were locked behind barred windows for decades, spending their entire lives in silence and obedience, whether they wanted to or not. Religious houses operated under a rule of enclosure, especially for nuns. This meant no contact with the outside world, no visits from family, no walks in the village, no chance of escape. Their lives were governed by a strict routine: prayers before dawn, labor, silence, cold meals, and often physical punishment. Some convents became sites of psychological torment. Abbesses wielded enormous power within their walls, deciding everything from meal rations to penance duties. There are documented cases of nuns being starved, isolated, or publicly humiliated for minor sins, like laughing or showing emotion. In one infamous case from 14th century France, a young nun named Jean was punished for talking to a visitor through the gate. Her abbess locked her in a cell for weeks and forbade the other nuns from speaking to her. She was found unconscious and nearly dead when a visiting bishop uncovered the abuse. While some monks lived quiet lives of service, others used their status to exploit those under their care. Several medieval documents reveal troubling stories of abuse, especially toward lay brothers, servants, and children brought into monasteries for education or training. Whistleblowing wasn't an option. If a monk beat an orphan, who could the orphan tell? If a novice was assaulted by his superior, where would he turn? The church hierarchy often closed ranks, and secular authorities were powerless to interfere. Monasteries were, in many ways, lawless islands protected by divine authority. And as history often shows, unchecked power invites corruption. You might think celibacy meant monks and nuns led pure lives. But let's just say medieval Europe had no shortage of scandalous tales. Monks were caught sneaking into convents. Abbots had mistresses. Some priests fathered children and quietly paid off mothers to avoid shame. One chronicler wrote that a particular Benedictine abbey was more familiar with wine and women than with God. Another account tells of an abbess who kept multiple male visitors and was eventually removed after a scandal erupted in the region. Of course, not every accusation was true. Sometimes rivals spread rumors to gain control of wealthy monasteries. But the pattern was too widespread to ignore. When historians dig through court records, church visitations, and secret letters, the evidence of systematic abuse is undeniable. Medieval monasteries weren't just places of prayer and scholarship. They were also economic powerhouses, managing vast estates and businesses that ranged from farms to vineyards to entire villages. This wealth and power attracted ambitious individuals who saw the monastery as a means to personal gain, leading to infighting, corruption, and even violence. Imagine a sprawling medieval monastery, its grounds encompassing a mix of farmland, vineyards, and workshops. This isn't just a place of worship and study. It's also a bustling economic hub. The monastery's leader, the abbot, presides over a hierarchy of monks and servants who manage this complex enterprise. While most monks are engaged in prayer and manual labor, a few live more comfortable lives. They oversee the estate's finances, negotiate business deals, and ensure the continued prosperity of the monastery, but not all is well in this seemingly ordered world. A power struggle is brewing beneath the surface. Some monks resent the growing wealth and influence of the monastery, believing it has strayed from its spiritual purpose. Others criticize the lavish lifestyles of the higher-ranking monks, seeing it as a betrayal of their vows of poverty and simplicity. Tensions rise and whispers of discontent spread through the halls. Then a shocking event occurs. A valuable relic goes missing, an accusation is made, and suspicion falls on Brother Thomas, a young monk known for his piety, but also rumored to have personal problems. Accused and alone, he must gather evidence to clear his name and uncover the real culprit, all while navigating the intrigues and rivalries that threaten to tear the monastery apart. Medieval monasteries weren't just centers of religious devotion, they were also hubs of intellectual activity and scholarship. But in the midst of this pursuit of knowledge, secrets and lies often thrived. Picture the scriptorium, a room filled with monks meticulously copying ancient texts. This isn't just a workspace, it's a treasure trove of ancient wisdom. But behind the quiet scratching of quills, rivalries and jealousies simmer. Brother John, a gifted scribe, finds his work overshadowed by the abbot's favorite, Brother Peter. Resentment grows, and John begins to plot his revenge. He starts by spreading rumors about Peter's work, then moves on to more sinister acts, manipulating events to make Peter look incompetent and even planning false accusations that could destroy him. Can Peter clear his name and expose John as treachery, or will the web of lies consume them both? Many monks and nuns lived pure lives dedicated to their faith. But as we've seen, not all of them entered religious life willingly, and not all of them remained faithful. Medieval monasteries, for all their good works, were not immune to human failings. Sometimes it was the darkness within individuals that corrupted the sanctity of the cloister. Other times it was the system itself, designed to keep secrets hidden and power unchecked. So what can we learn from this darker history? How can we ensure that places of worship and learning remain sanctuaries of peace and enlightenment rather than breeding grounds for abuse and deceit? Perhaps the answer lies in embracing transparency, accountability, and compassion. By acknowledging the shadows of our past, We can work towards a brighter future where the sanctity of the sacred is upheld and the rights of the vulnerable are protected. Did you know there's such a thing as haunted houses? You probably don't need me to tell you this. But what if I told you that one of your neighbors might have a haunted house? Haunted by ghosts or perhaps haunted by the devil himself? That sounds like a creepy ghost story, but it's not. Well, in fact, this kind of thing actually happened quite frequently during the Middle Ages. Here are 5 examples of houses that were cursed. Number 5, the House of Usher, in 1839. Edgar Allan Poe published a horror story about a crumbling mansion on a bleak and isolated marsh. He called it The Fall of the House of Usher. The home was occupied by 2 siblings, Roderick and Madeline Usher, who are dying of a strange illness that affects the entire family. As the story goes, the walls of their home were literally bleeding. Poe's description of the home as a symbol of the Usher family's decline has become iconic. But did he invent it? Not exactly. Much like Poe's own life, the story of the House of Usher was inspired by real events and real places. Some say it was inspired by Hill House, which is a real estate agent's nightmare. Built in 1635, the house is located in Salem, Massachusetts, and has been the site of multiple deaths, hauntings, and even a murder. If you want to visit, it's now open for tours. Just don't forget to bring a priest. Number 4, Devil's Den. There are countless stories of demonic possession in the Bible, but even non-religious folks know how scary a possessed person can be. We've seen movies like The Exorcist, The Conjuring, and Amityville Horror and shuddered at the mere thought of such things happening to us. But what if the demon wasn't inside the person, but rather inside the place they call home? Imagine going to your backyard to relax only to find a wall covered with pentagrams and satanic symbols. Even worse, imagine waking up in the middle of the night and hearing whispers in the shadows. Something like this happened in Colorado in the 1970s when families living on the block, known as Devil's Den, started finding unsettling things around their homes. Trees with pentagrams carved into them, churches desecrated, and even goats with their throats cut. Sure, it could have been teenagers playing a trick, but the residents were convinced it was something darker, maybe even a Satanist cult. Despite the eerie occurrences, none of the residents would leave their homes. To this day, Devil's Den is considered one of the most haunted blocks in America. No, 3, the Witch's House. When you think of witches, you probably think of black cats, cauldrons, and broomsticks. You might also think of pointy hats. But did you know that pointy hats aren't actually associated with witches? They're actually associated with judges and priests. In fact, pointy witch hats were invented over 500 years ago by a guy named William Lamb, who created them as an easy way to collect taxes. But this invention wasn't well received, especially by the Puritans. In 1644, they banned pointy hats because they reminded them of the Catholic clergy, who they saw as nothing more than the devil's disciples. But not everyone respected the Puritan rules, especially a woman named Rebecca Nurse. She continued to wear her pointy hat even after the ban, and she wore it so proudly that they nicknamed her the Witch of Salem. After being arrested for witchcraft, she became the first innocent person to die in the Salem witch trials. Her house, now known as the Witch House, is still standing, and visitors come from around the world to see it. Although there haven't been any reports of hauntings, paranormal investigators say Rebecca's spirit may linger in the building, along with the spirits of her accusers. No, 2, the Hell House. If you want to make a movie about a haunted house, you can't go wrong with a house like the Hell House, located in New Orleans. This French Quarter mansion was once owned by a Creole family named Latour. In 1834, a fire broke out in the attic, and it's rumored that the family tried to put it out with turpentine. This caused the flames to spread and eventually destroyed the home. Since then, the house has changed hands many times, and each new owner has tried to renovate it. But before they even break ground, construction mysteriously stops and the site is abandoned again. There have been countless attempts to restore the home, but the project always ends in disaster. Some say the Latour family is cursed and that their angry ghosts will never allow anyone to live in the house. Others say that the neighborhood has simply changed too much and that it's best to leave the house alone. No. 1. The Murder Castle. In 1896, a man named H. Holmes opened the doors to his Chicago World's Fair. This bizarre structure contained a labyrinth of tunnels, trapdoors, and hidden rooms. And it was here that Holmes lured his victims to their deaths. Over the next 3 years, he murdered over 20 people, including his own brother. Once the murders were discovered, his castle was torn down, but not before author Frank Norris immortalized it in print. Today, the exact location of the murder castle is unknown, but historians believe it stood somewhere in the area of the 1893 World's Fair, and while there's no evidence that ghosts linger near the spot where the castle once stood, you might want to steer clear anyway. Who knows what evil lurks in those shadows? We hope you enjoyed our list of haunted houses that are scarier than fiction. We'll be back soon with more scary stories from history, so be sure to stay tuned for more updates. And in the meantime, check out these other videos. When you think of medieval monks, you probably picture solemn figures clad in rough-spun robes, subsisting on humble fare and spending their days in prayer and manual labor. However, the story doesn't end there. Because while the image of the impoverished monk is a popular one, the reality was far more complicated. Behind the scenes, some members of the clergy were amassing great fortunes, wielding tremendous political power and indulging in luxuries that many of their contemporaries could only dream of. Hi, I'm the host, and this is our series. Today we are exploring the darker side of monasticism and asking how some religious orders became some of the wealthiest and most controversial institutions of the Middle Ages. During the medieval period, religious orders started accumulating large amounts of land because of donations from wealthy nobles looking to secure their place in the afterlife. While these gifts were made with the best of intentions, they had the effect of making religious orders some of the largest landowners in Europe by the High Middle Ages. For example, the Cluny, a monastic order founded in the 900s, ended up owning land in France, England, Spain, Italy, and Germany, thanks to generous donations from royals. Meanwhile, other orders such as the Benedictines and Cistercians received massive land grants throughout much of Europe. The acquisition of land was not merely a result of donations. Religious orders also actively purchased property from secular lords, sometimes taking advantage of noble families' involvement in costly crusades. This buying spree transformed monasteries into economic powerhouses, setting the stage for them to become ruthless landlords. Now, you might be wondering how monasteries turned into veritable real estate moguls. Well, imagine this. You've got a bunch of buildings and acres of land, but no one to manage it all. Enter the trusty monk. These guys weren't afraid of hard work. In fact, manual labor was a big part of their daily routine. So they started putting their hands to good use, managing their land and buildings, which provided them with enough food and resources to sustain themselves. That's right, self-sufficiency was key for these industrious monks. But that's not all they did. In addition to providing for their own needs, these resourceful monks began to charge the peasants who farmed the land for a portion of their crops. In exchange, the monks offered the peasants protection and the right to farm the land. Now that's a deal. But the terms of these agreements weren't always balanced. In many cases, the monks demanded hefty payments from the peasants and often resorted to exploitative practices. What's more, these religious institutions weren't satisfied with just collecting rent. They also squeezed their tenants by forcing them to perform unpaid labor for the monastery. This included tasks like building projects, repairing walls, or even working in the fields during planting and harvesting seasons. Needless to say, this extra burden placed a significant strain on the peasants and added to their already heavy workload. But that wasn't the end of it. The monks also imposed additional financial obligations on the peasants through tithes. Tithes were essentially taxes that the peasants had to pay to the church, and they amounted to 10% of their income, produce, or crops. In essence, the peasants were paying the monks 3 times over, first through rent, then through forced labor, and finally through tithes. This created a cycle of debt and dependence that kept the peasants trapped in a system that heavily favored the monks. So the religious orders weren't just sitting pretty in their fancy monasteries. They were actively involved in squeezing every last drop of profit out of their land and their tenants. In effect, they turned their religious houses into highly successful businesses that generated substantial revenue and secured their position as some of the richest institutions in medieval Europe. The sheer wealth amassed by these religious orders not only made them some of the biggest landowners, but also put them on par with or even ahead of many secular rulers in terms of material possessions. This raises important questions about the distribution of power and wealth during the Middle Ages and challenges our assumptions about the role of religion in society. These weren't just your run-of-the-mill monks seeking a quiet life of prayer and solitude. They were shrewd business operators, skilled negotiators, and ruthless exploiters. How so? Well, let's dive deeper. Let's take the Cistercians, an order known for its dedication to hard work and self-sufficiency. These guys weren't content with begging for food or donations. They wanted to create a new model of monastic life that was based on economic independence and expansion. Unlike other orders, they didn't shy away from engaging in commerce and trade. In fact, they saw it as a way to grow their wealth and spread their influence. By the 12th century, Cistercian monasteries were some of the largest landowners in Europe. They held vast tracts of land that were worked by tenant farmers who paid rent and followed strict rules set by the monks. But it wasn't just about collecting rent. The Cistercians used their land to generate even more wealth. They invested in mills, fisheries, and vineyards, which brought in steady streams of income. Additionally, they were pioneers in sheep farming, introducing new breeds of sheep, and developing innovative shearing techniques that boosted wool production. Cistercian monks weren't satisfied with the status quo. They constantly sought new ways to expand their territory and increase their wealth. They targeted areas with abundant natural resources, fertile land, and strategic locations. Once they set their sights on a piece of land, they employed a variety of tactics to acquire it. Sometimes they negotiated with landowners, offering favorable deals that benefited both parties. Other times they purchased land outright, using their growing wealth to outbid potential rivals. And when necessary, they resorted to more aggressive methods, taking advantage of noble families' involvement in crusades or other conflicts to seize land that was left undefended or under the control of weak rulers. Once they had expanded their territory, the Cistercians implemented efficient systems to maximize profits. They carefully planned the layout of their estates, ensuring optimal use of resources and easy transportation of goods. They also introduced accounting practices to keep track of income and expenses, appointed skilled administrators to oversee their properties, and established networks to distribute their products throughout Europe. But it wasn't just about accumulating wealth. The Cistercians believed that their success was part of a divine mission to improve the world. They saw themselves as pioneers, taming wild lands and bringing order to chaos. They also believed that their economic strength would enhance their spiritual power, allowing them to spread Christianity and support worthy causes. However, their relentless pursuit of wealth and influence came at a cost. The Cistercians faced opposition from other monastic orders that criticized their commercial activities and from secular rulers who resented their growing power. Despite these challenges, the Cistercians persevered, adapting to changing circumstances and finding new ways to grow their wealth. Their legacy continues to shape our understanding of monasticism, capitalism, and the relationship between religion and economics. While the Cistercians were a prominent example, other religious orders, such as the Benedictines, also engaged in similar practices, amassing wealth and expanding their influence across Europe. As we've seen, religious orders became some of the wealthiest institutions of their time through a combination of factors, including generous land donations, strategic land purchases, efficient management practices, and a willingness to engage in commerce and trade. However, their immense wealth did not come without consequences. These institutions faced opposition from various groups, including other monastic orders, secular rulers, and those who felt exploited by their land management practices. Nevertheless, their impact on medieval European society is undeniable, and their story provides valuable insights into the complex relationship between religion, economics, and power. As a kid, my view of medieval monasteries was simple. They were places where monks prayed a lot, wrote really cool books, and made beautiful art. Sure, I knew they owned a lot of land, but I assumed that was just because back then, if you wanted to build a chapel, you kind of needed an annex first. Basically, I thought they were kind of like old school churches, just with more cows. Turns out my picture of these holy orders was about as accurate as thinking the Pope wears those funny clothes for the aesthetic. After 2 previous episodes exploring their glories and their grittier realities, it's time for the unvarnished truth. About religious orders in the Middle Ages. What happens when the holiest buildings become the wealthiest, and what happens when no one else watching? By the end of the Middle Ages, something was rotting in the heart of the church. The once revered monasteries and religious orders, those bastions of prayer, charity, and simplicity, had, in many places, become symbols of excess, corruption, and arrogance. Their wealth rivaled kings, their secrecy rivaled spies, and their moral failures could no longer be ignored. In this final part, we explore how the dark side of medieval religious orders triggered revolts, reformations, and ruin, and how their legacy still echoes today. Too rich, too powerful, too late, for centuries, religious orders had enjoyed immunity. They answered to no king, paid no taxes, and hid behind walls that shut out the world and criticism. But by the 14th and 15th centuries, cracks began to appear. The public had had enough. Peasants groaned under the weight of tithes and labor. Merchants resented being outcompeted by charitable monasteries that didn't pay taxes. And intellectuals began to question whether monks truly serve God or just themselves. Some monks lived like minor royalty. Chronicles tell of abbots traveling with hunting dogs, mistresses, and gold-trimmed robes. Cloisters built towering cathedrals not to inspire faith but to flex wealth. Meanwhile, townsfolk struggled to afford bread. The hypocrisy was no longer invisible. It was insulting heretics or heroes. The first whistleblowers before Martin Luther ever nailed his 95 Theses to a door. Others had already started to speak out. In England, John Wycliffe denounced the church's greed and called for a return to scripture-based faith. He criticized monasteries for hoarding wealth and neglecting the poor. His followers, the Lollards, were hunted, tortured, and burned as heretics. In Bohemia, Jan Hus preached against the corruption of church leaders, especially the selling of indulgences and the luxurious lifestyles of religious elites. He, too, was declared a heretic and burned alive in 1415. Both men inspired reform movements long before the Reformation officially began. Their deaths were meant to silence dissent. Instead, they lit the fuse. The Reformation, when the hammer fell, the real reckoning came in the 16th century. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther publicly criticized the church's sale of indulgences and questioned its authority. But his complaints didn't stop there. Luther and the Protestant Reformation he launched also attacked the wealth and corruption of monasteries. Many reformers viewed religious orders as parasites, hoarding land, exploiting peasants, and masking greed with prayers. Across Protestant regions, monasteries were shut down, their lands confiscated, their wealth seized by kings or redistributed. In England, King Henry VIII famously dissolved hundreds of monasteries in the 1530s. Ostensibly, it was part of his new Church of England, but in reality it was a massive land grab. Vast monastic estates were handed out to nobles and supporters. Gold and relics were stripped. Abbeys were torn down or converted into castles. The once invincible monastic orders had fallen hard and fast. Some orders fought back, or hid. Not all monks went quietly. In some regions, religious orders fought to preserve their holdings. Riots broke out. Abbeys became armed fortresses. But without the political protection of the Pope, or the loyalty of the people they lost, other orders simply adapted. The Jesuits, founded in the 16th century, embraced education, mission work, and discipline. They learned from the mistakes of older orders. Instead of hoarding land, they built schools and universities. Instead of demanding tithes, they spread influence through teaching and diplomacy. But even they would later face accusations of manipulation and secrecy. Power, as always, remained a double-edged sword. Echoes of the past by the early modern period, thousands of monasteries had vanished. Their relics were melted down. Their libraries burned, their monks scattered, some became priests. Some fled, some disappeared into obscurity. but the damage to the church's reputation remained. The memory of bloated abbots and corrupt friars didn't die with the Middle Ages. It lived on in Protestant sermons, reformist propaganda, and eventually modern skepticism about religious institutions. Even today, scandals in religious communities are met with cynicism shaped by centuries of abuse and secrecy. The shadows cast by medieval religious orders are long and not easily forgotten. Not all were monsters, let's be clear. Not every monk or nun was corrupt. Many lived truly holy lives. They cared for the sick, fed the poor, and taught the ignorant. Some stood up against injustice, some died for their beliefs. But the system allowed for darkness. It rewarded silence. It protected abusers. It placed divine authority in the hands of fallible humans and gave them too much power, too little oversight, and too many excuses. That's why this story matters, because even institutions built for good can go wrong, especially when no one is watching. The final judgment. So, what do we learn from the dark side of medieval religious orders? That purity can be a mask. That prayers can hide greed. That faith, when mixed with unchecked power, can become dangerous. But also that ordinary people can resist. They can question. They can reform. They can expose. The monasteries of the Middle Ages are mostly gone now. Some are ruins. Some are tourist attractions. Some are just footnotes in dusty books. But the lessons they left behind, they'll still ring loud and clear, even behind the holiest walls. Darkness can dwell. So remember, as you ponder those ancient stones or read about saints on pages, those hallowed halls weren't always so hallowed. And sometimes the holiest orders can cast the longest shadows. Now it's your turn. What surprised you most about the history of religious orders? Any insights, stories, or quotes you want to share? Post them below. Let's discuss. Also, big thanks to our supporters for making this series possible. If you want to join the community and get cool perks like blooper reels, extended cuts, and early access, head over to our support page. New at our $25 tier, we've got a super thanks button. Click it in any video and send us a virtual coffee, a pizza, or even an iPad. This is huge, and thank you. And don't forget to subscribe. Better yet, hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. Thanks for watching. See you next time.